Welcome back. This video is an extension for the block scope variables, which is a previous video, and in this video we will try to understand what is local and global scope. So the words local and global are been discussed in the very first video, so if you don't know, just go through that video once again. Now this is a very short video, like we discussed what is local and global scope. So coming to, we discussed what is block scope, right, in the previous video. So similar to that, variables are function scoped, context scoped, something like this. When we call a function, a brand new execution context will be created for that function, right? So let me write a very short code, like let some variable a with a value of 20, and then I'll create another function, and the function name is test, and here inside I'm going to access a. Okay, and then here I'll take a, and here I'll call this by using 20, not 20, I'll make it to 300. Okay, so let's try to analyze this piece of code. How does it execute? So let me draw this call stack. Yeah, so when we run this file, what will happen? At the very bottommost, global execution context will be created. So global execution context at the very bottommost, and then execution will start from line number 1. So at line number 1 we declare a variable a. So a is in the global, so we declare it here with a value of 20, and then the control moves to line number 2, and from line number 2 to 4 it's a declaration of a test variable with a value of function. So test, it's a function value, and then the control from 2 will directly jump to line number 5, and at line number 5 we are calling the function test by passing some value 300. So what will happen? A brand new execution context will be created which takes the 300 value, and that context will be the test execution context, because we invoked, right? So here we invoke, that means there will be a pause over here, and the 300 value will be passed. And who is there to take that 300? So the parameter a, and I told you parameters are the variables which will behave as if they are declared inside that function. So variable a will be declared with a value of 300 that's been passed from outside of this context, basically from here. So once a captures, then we enter into the control jumps from line number 5 to line number 2, and at line number 2 we are printing a. So line number 2 is strictly present inside this test execution context. So in an execution context, when we try to access a variable, what will happen is, if that variable is present in that context, then it will print. Otherwise it will search for that variable in its parent execution context, and so on, much like the same thing happened in case of block scope. So here there is no point of no variable not there, so variable a is there here itself, so it will get that variable a and it will print 300. Okay, and let's try to compare this a300 and a20. So this a20 is present in the global execution context, and this a300 is present in the test execution context. So being in the test execution context, we are trying to print variable a, but that variable a will not access this 20, but it will access 300 instead, because when a variable we are trying to access being in a context or being in a block, that variable will be searched within that context or within that block first. So if it is there, then it will access that. If it is not there, then only it will search in its parent block or parent context. Okay, I will tell you the definition of the parent context very shortly. Now after execution of this function, what will happen? This one is going to print 300 in the console. So let me show you. So you see 300 got printed just like this. Now let's say I don't pass anything like this. Here I don't pass anything. Now let's try to analyze what happens this time. So let me erase all this. Okay, so when we execute this piece of code, firstly global execution context, and in the global execution context variable a with a value of 20, and then the function test with a value of a function just like this, and from line number 2 to line number 4 definition, so the control jumps to line number 5 directly, and at line number 5 this is the invocation, and we know what happens during the invocation. So when we invoke a function, a brand new context will be created for that, and there will be a pause at that line, and in the brand new execution context, which is test execution context, there are no arguments, no parameters, so nothing will happen, and the control directly jumps into the function which is line number 3, and at line number 3 we are trying to print a variable a. Now this time you look, is there a variable a within this context? No. So what should it do? Will it throw the error saying not defined, or will it search for the variable a within its parent context? So it won't throw any error, but instead it will search for the same variable in its parent context. Wait a second, what is the parent execution context? So here we are inside test execution context. That means test is a function, right? So test is a function, and this function should have declared in some other context. So that is in the global execution context. So you see here is the declaration of the variable declaration of test, where in the global execution context. So for a context, wherever that variable is declared or wherever that function is declared, that context we call as the parent of the current context. So since test variable is declared in the global execution context, the parent context of test execution context will be the global execution context. So since variable a is not there, so JavaScript engine will search for a in its parent execution context. The parent execution context is global, and in the global the value a is there, so it will access that a. So basically 20 gets printed this time instead of throwing an error. Let me show you that, and you see we get 20. Okay, let me erase this. So now similarly, what I'll do is I'll try to create another function called call me, and in this function I'm going to have let's say here also I'm going to have let let's say p, and in this function also I'm going to have let's equal to 88, and then here I'm going to print a plus b plus c, just like this, and then here I'll call this function call me, and for the calculation easy I'll make it to 90 and this one to 80. So let's try to analyze this piece of code again. So basically what will happen is, firstly global execution context be declared, and it will start, execution will start from line number 1. So at line number 1 is present in global, so variable a with a value of 20 will be declared here, and then the control jumps to line number 2, and from line number 2 to line number 10, this is entirely the function definition test. So variable test be declared with a value of a function like this, and then the control directly jumps to line number 11 from line number 2. So at line number 11 we are invoking the function test. So whenever we invoke the function test, what should happen? A brand new execution context will be created for it. So this is the test execution context, and once the execution context is created, the control will directly jump from line number 11 to inside that function which is line number 3. So at line number 3 variable b is declared, so b will be declared here with a value of 90, and then the control moves to line number 4. So at line number 4 we are trying to print a plus b. So let's try to evaluate what is a plus b here. So is there a variable a within this context? No. So in this context, test execution context, variable a is not there. So JavaScript engine will search for that variable in its parent context. So the test is declared here, right? You see, in the global execution context. So parent of test execution context is GEC. So a will be accessed from there. So a is there in this context, so 20 will be accessed from there. And then what about b? So is there a variable b within this context? Yes, and the value is 90. So 90 plus 20, which is 110, will be printed at line number 4. and then the control will move forward and to line number 5, and line number 5 to line number 8, it's a function declaration, another variable called call me declaration. So that variable will also be declared within this context only. So call me with the value of a function, and then from line number 5 to the control directly jumps to line number 11, because 5 to 8 it's just a definition. And then at line number 9, what we are doing, we are calling the function call me. So here is an invocation call me. So since it is an invocation, what will happen, a brand new context will be created for that. So this is call me execution context, and in the call me execution context, when the call me execution context is created, the control from line number 9 will jump inside that function call me. So basically inside that function means this line, which is line number 6. So at line number 6 we declare a variable c. So c with a value of 80 will be declared here, and then control moves to line number 7, and at line number 7 we are trying to print a plus b plus c. So let's try to evaluate what is a plus b plus c. So is there a variable a within this context call me? No. So variable a is not there in the call me execution context. What should happen? A should be searched in its parent context. Who is the parent of call me? Is it GEC or is it test execution context? Let's see. The call me is declared within test execution context. So test execution context is the parent of call me. So in its parent it will search. But is there a variable a in its parent? Is there a variable a declared in its parent? So there is a variable b here, but there is no variable called a. So when a is not there in test execution context, again recursively it will search in its parent. Who is the parent of test execution context? GEC. And in the GEC, is there a variable a? Yes. So a will be accessed from here into here, so which is line 20. And then what about b? Is there a variable b within this context? Again no. So what will happen? In the parent of call me execution context we need to check, and in its parent it's there, which is 90, so 90 be accessed from there. And then what about c? So variable c, is the variable c is present in this context? Yes. The value of it is 80, so it will access 80. So the summation of all these three is 190. So in the place of this, it's going to print 190, and it won't throw any errors because we have seen it manually, right? And now after line number 7, the control moves to line number 8, and at line number 8 it's the closing brace of this call me. So that means what should happen? Call me execution context should get erased. So call me execution context will get erased just like this from the call stack. And then where we paused at this line. So there will be a play here. That means at this line here at line number 9, we are done with line number 9 now, and the control will move on to line number 10. So line number 10 is the closing brace of the test execution context, test function. So test execution context should also get erased. So that is this one. And then once that is also done, from where we call this test execution context at line number 11, so the control will get back to there. So here actually previously paused, right? Now there will be a play, and the control will jump to line number 11 and then to line number 12. So line number 11 is also done now. So from line number 12 there is nothing in the global execution context, so global execution context will also be erased just like this. And when global execution context is erased, that's the end of the program. So this is how our code is going to get executed internally. And let me save, and you see 110 and 190 are the outputs respectively. 110 is printed here and 190 is printed here. This is pretty much about how variables are behaving inside a function and then inside a blocks. And we might also have something this scenario. Let me comment this code, and let's see another scenario where I'll declare a variable a with a value of 10, and if true, I'll declare a variable a, let b equal to 90, and then here I'll declare function test, and then here I'll log b plus a, okay, or this is also a, and then I'll create b with a value of 100, and then here I'll call. So before you watch this, just give a try what is the output and just guess the output, and then do watch this later to verify your answer. I would suggest you to do this yourself just to check how much you did understand. So let me explain before I save and see the output actually. So let's see what happens. Firstly, global execution context, and control will start from line number 13. So at line number 13, a variable a with a value of 20, and then the condition is true. So since the condition is true, what should happen? A block should be created within that context, just like this, and we enter into the block, and the control will move on to line number 15, where another variable a is declared with a value of 90. So a will be declared with a value of 90 within the global execution context only, and then control will jump to line number 16, and at line number 16 to line number 19, it's a variable declaration called test. So test variable be declared, and it's a function value. The value of test variable is a function, and then the control jumps directly to line number 20, and at line number 20 we call the function. So I told you, whenever we call the function, what will happen? So at line number 20 we are calling, so there will be a pause here, and since we are calling, a brand new execution context will be created, which is test execution context. And in the test execution context there is no argument, so we directly jump into the function. Into the function means basically to this line, which is line number 17, and at line number 17 we declare a variable b, so b with a value of 100, and then the control will jump to line number 18, and at line number 18 we print b plus a. So let us evaluate b plus a. What is b? Is there a variable b within this context? Yes, and the value is 100 plus. What is a? Is there a variable within this context? No. So what should happen? It should search in its parent execution context. And here the question comes. So there are two variables in the parent execution context of test execution context. One is a equal to 20 and the other one is a equal to 90. But the searching will happen in the global execution context only, because test function is declared in the global execution context. But which one it will take? Will it take 20 or will it take 90? That depends on in which block the function is defined. So the function is defined in the green block. So firstly it will look for that a in the green block. So if it finds, then it will get, otherwise it will look in its upper blocks and so on. Okay, so variable a equal to 90 is there in the green block, so variable a is there, so it will access that value. So it will print the summation to be 190 as the output. And then once the invocation is done, what will happen? The control moves to line number 19, where the closing brace of the function, the context will be erased, right? The context will be erased just like this. And once the context is also erased, what will happen? The control comes to line number 21, because we are done with the invocation. So line number 21 is the end of the block, green color block. So green color block should also be erased from the global execution context, just like this. And then after line number 21 there is no code in the global execution context, so global execution context will also be erased. So when global is erased, that's the end of the program. So the output for this code is 190. So let me show you, let me save, and you see we get 190, which is printed from line number 18. So yeah, that is pretty much about scopes, block scope and then functional scope. And in the next video we will see the closures. If you like the video, please do share it with your friends. Thanks for watching. Do subscribe to this channel.